Hey guys, so in today's tutorial of building out chat PDF, we are going to be designing the UI that looks something like this. So let's see where we are at currently. We just have a chat page authenticated for which the code you can see over here. But what we want to achieve is have navbar in which we have the home, which lists all the chats we have currently stored in Supabase. So all of these are loaded from Supabase, as well as we have a start new chat, which is a form to create a new chat. And we also have a logout button to log out from our current session. What we have right now is I've manually created these two chats from within the Supabase dashboard because in this video, we are going to be concentrating on loading the chats in a list like this. And in one of the future videos, we're going to be focusing on being able to create new chats using this form, but that is for a later video. So let's just get started with this. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, so we already have a page.svelte which is rendering this h1 tag. So firstly, what we are going to do is we are going to render out the navbar, which looks something like this. So for this, we are going to modify our layout.ts file. Right now, we are simply rendering out the slot, which is any child page render within this layout, but we want to create some sort of a header which would render out the navbar. So let's have h1 which renders chat PDF, and here we can see chat PDF, and let's have a navbar which contains certain links, and the first link is going to be home. Then we are going to have a start new chat. Then we are going to have like a logout button. So this is a logout button. And of course, we're getting some squiggly lines because we do not have an href for these anchor elements. So let's do that. This is going to be chat. And this chat is home because as you can see, we have a chat route. So this is where we want to point at. In create, we can have chat new or chat create. I want to have a chat create one. And let's just save that so we can see these links, but we do not have any styling or anything. So let's try to do that now. So for the header, class equals bg muted. And we also want to give this a border. So let's see how that looks. Yeah. We also want to give it a little bit of a padding, and we want to make the border rounded to some extent. We want to render everything in a flex, and we also want to use flex wrap just so that it looks good when it's responsive. And we are going to give it a justify center, but on this screen, we are going to give it a justify start. And just to give some gap, I'm going to give it some gap between the items, and a vertical gap. This is useful when the items wrap. And we also want to give it an item center, which doesn't make a lot of difference, but I think it does when we are on a smaller screen. So for H1, we're just going to do scroll M20 and actually just accept some of the suggestions that cursor is giving us, but we are going to add text 5 pixel over here. So yeah, that's basically the H1 tag. And in nav, what we are going to do is we are going to make all the text blue because this is basically links, but we are going to override the colors for the logo button. So we're going to make this text red 500, and on hover, we want to just do an underline. We're going to give it an underline offset of 2 and just an ML of 4 just to make it slightly more away than the other buttons. We can add the same thing over here and ML4, and I can basically do the same thing over here. Sorry. Now, it would be nice for us to permanently underline the route that we are on currently. For example, currently we are on the home route, so it would be nice to have that underlined. And the way we do that is basically we access the page variable that Svelte gives us, and we can add a data active um, attribute. And this is cursor giving us access to. So now what we want to do is for whichever route we are currently on, which is active, we want to have a permanent underline. So for that, we are going to use the page store by Svelte, and we are going to add a data active attribute, page.url.pathname equals chat. It is the same one as the href over here. And then we can do some styling based on this data attribute. And if it is true, we can just have an underline. So right now, as you can see, we are on this route. So we have an underline over here. We can do the same thing for other routes. And I'll just let cursor do its trick. And voila, we have that. Now, this route wouldn't work because we do not have this route, so it renders a 404. We still have the header because it's part of the layout and not any specific page. Let's go back to the home route because that's where we are going to be actively working on. Next up, let's add functionality to this logout button. And for this, what we can do is we can basically access the Supabase variable we have in the context, and we can access the context like this. And then to destructure Supabase from the data, we can do something like this. I think that this parenthesis should go in here. Yeah. And we have access to the Supabase variable. Now we can define an async function logout, and we can do await supabase.auth.signout, and we can also do invalidate all, which is from the navigation store. And what this does is it invalidates all the network requests that we have that Svelte is keeping track of. So now let's bind this logout function with the logout button. We can do an on click logout. And now if I log out, it will just take me back to the welcome to PDF route. Now, as you can see, we do not want to have this header once we are on the unauthenticated page. So that tells me that this header is in the wrong layout. We need to fix that. So let's fix that. We're just going to take all of this code, put it in the auth layout. So let's create a layout over here. And just render this over here. We're going to render the slot. Just take most of this code, the script code, add it over here. Just remove app.css because we are mounting that in the root layout. And now what we can do is we can just remove all of this code because we don't need this over here at all. So in our unauthenticated layout, we do not have any markup. So once we sign in, we have the header in the layout, authenticated layout now. One thing I like to add is when I click on logout, I want to have like a loading indicator because this is an async operation. It takes time. So it's good to have a loading indicator for that. So to be able to do that, I need to have a loading icon basically. So let's create a loading.svelte. And our loading indicator is quite simple. We can use a loading circle, and let's just import that from Lucide Svelte. We do not have this currently, so let's just install that. npm add Lucide Svelte. So now we can do a loader circle and update that over here. And we just want to add a class which is inline and animate spin. Now, we also want to be able to accept any external classes that we are adding into this. So let's use the CN utility to be able to merge those classes, and we can access the class name in REST props that Svelte gives us access to. And now back in our layout, what we can do is maintain a state. Let logging out equals false, and logging out is true. And you can do this, loading out is false. And we can have a conditional over here which says that if we are logging out, we want to render a loading component. We can import this component from loading. And now if I click logout, okay, next up we want to load all the chats on this page, on the home page, and that should look like something like this. So to do that, we are going to basically have a load function, a loader that would load all the chat from Supabase. And the way we do that is in the auth page, we're currently on the chat route. So on this path, we are going to do a page.server.ts. And within the page.server.ts, we are just going to be creating load function. And we are going to access the locals we have in the global context. So we have access to Supabase, and we also have access to the current session of the user. So we are going to grab the new user, and we are going to make a defensive check that if the user doesn't exist, we want to error out with a 403 error. Else we are going to just load data from Supabase for this user. So Supabase dot from chats select all, and we're going to give it a where condition where the user is basically user.id. And the data we are going to get back, we need to await this. We're going to name the data chats, and any error we are going to get, we are going to map it to underscore error because we have already error defined, which is an import from Svelte. And in here, we can just return the chats as a whole. And if we are going to have an error, we can again throw the error with a 500 and underscore error dot message. One small fix, this should be user ID and not user. Now, once we have defined this load function, we can access the data returned from this load function. And the way to do that is go to this page.svelte and export let data. Now we can destructure chats from this data. And what we can do is before we do any styling or anything, we can just do json.stringify chats null to. Yes, so we are returning both of these chat items in JSON format, and now it's all about just mapping over this array of chat objects and rendering it in a list. So now we are going to be rendering the UI for each chat item. And for this, we are going to create two components. One is the chat list component, and the other is the chat list item component. And the chat list actually is an unordered list. So it's a UL element. And we're going to apply some styles, such as giving some margin between elements that are inside of it. And we are also going to render it in a flex column. We're going to give it a min height of full so that it takes the full page's height. And this slot component is actually what is going to be rendered inside of the chat list item component. So let's define that. The chat list item is just going to be a list item specifically, and we're actually going to accept a prop, which is the chat prop, and this is basically the prop that is going to contain all the data that we want to render in this component. And the type for this is going to come from Supabase. And since we do not have the Supabase generated types for TypeScript, let's do that. We create a server, we create a server folder, a DB folder, and a gentypes TS file. And then we add a script from Supabase CLI in our package JSON. And what this does, it uses the CLI for Supabase to generate the TypeScript types for our project that we have connected. And it takes all the schema from the public schema in our Postgres database, and it just adds that to the to this path, which is the server db gentypes.ts. It's under the lib folder, so let's move the server folder to the lib folder. And now we are ready to basically trigger this command and see these types in action. So we're going to do pnpm db type gen, and it's going to take all the types from our Supabase project and just dump that into here. Look at that. Now we have a database, and in which we have tables that we previously created, the questions and chats table. And now we can access this type in our code base. So we're going to import this from the file gentypes we just created, and we have autocomplete for the tables we have. So in this case, we're accessing the chats table. And let's make this a TypeScript type, the script. And now you can see we can access all the properties from the chat item, and we can use this to basically render any information about the chat, so such as the chat title and the kind of other information such as the public URL, etc., etc. All the information we have on the right over here. But first, we are going to just render the chat title, and what we are going to do, we are going to import chat list, which is the UL tag, basically a list. And then we are going to loop through all the chats we have loaded from our API, and then just render out chat list items and pass in the chat item. Let's just close this. So this is a small notation in which you can simply write chat like this if the name of the prop and the key of the prop is the same. So right now we're loading all the chats, but they're pushed down to the bottom of the page. So let's fix that in the chat list by removing the justify end. And then we have all the chats loaded in the kind of top of the page. And now just add some styling and other information from the chat that we kind of accept in this component. We're going to add some Tailwind styles such as padding, some border, and some background color to make it look nice. And we are going to just add some hover properties as well to change the background once we hover over the chat item. We're also going to make it cursor pointer because we want this to be clickable, such that when we click, we go into the chat itself. We are also going to apply some styles to the the title, which is basically flex. And we are also going to apply the group class from Tailwind, which allows us to style children, children elements when we hover over the element that contains the group, div in this case. This is just standard applying styles, making the font larger and bolder. So we are also going to add the, created at date for this chat item. Now this created at date is a simple timestamp, and later on we are going to write a helper function to make it more human readable. Here we are checking if there's a source available for this chat, and if there is, then we are also going to add a link to this source. We're going to also apply some class to make it look like it's a link. So make it blue and underlined. And if there's no source, then we just can say that there is no source. Typically, there should always be a source. This should be enforced by our validation. But right now, I've created some dummy data, so we do not have actual, URLs. And it's actually called PDF public URL and not PDF pub URL. So let's fix that. We're gonna add an arrow right icon so we can indicate that this chat can be opened. And here's when the group property comes into play. So by default, it should be hidden. But when we hover over the group element, which is the parent element, this div, then we are gonna say that, okay, make this visible by setting the opacity to 100. And when we hover over the arrow itself, we can also change the background color for the icon. As you can see over here, it changes the background when we hover over the icon itself, but the icon is visible when we hover over the parent element. We can also apply some padding and make it rounded. This is just styling. You can style however you want it to be. And we are also going to apply some transition properties so that it's nice and smooth, as you see here. Right now it looks almost similar to how we have it. I think the next big thing would be to make the layout right, and we also want to make the date into a human readable format. So let's first make the layout fixed by making this span a block, and now it's pushed to the next line. And we can make it smaller and just change the color of the text. Now would be a good time to create a utility function so we can get a human readable date. And we're going to name this function chat date format, accept a date object, and just use the browser's intl library to create a formatter function and just specify some properties, like we want the month to be short, and the date to be numeric, or numeric, minute numeric. This returns us a format function which we can use to format the date. Now we can just apply this function on the created at timestamp, if I can import it correctly. And just pass it over here. And I think that that is pretty much it. I think that there is some things we need to do, which is like fix the spacing over here and just make a margin to both the sides of the web page so that it resembles something like this. So let's do that. So for that, we are going to go to the root layout and we're going to wrap this slot using main tag. We're going to give it a padding on the sides and also on the bottom, and we're going to restrict the width. Awesome. To add some margin on top of the list items, we can go to the page and wrap this in a div class of empty, maybe 4. Awesome. So now we have the chat list items and they're loaded from Supabase. We showcase pretty much all the information we have about the chat list item, but when we click on this, we don't do anything. And what I would like to have is like this list item is basically an anchor tag that leads us to the chat session. So how we can do that is just wrap this with an A tag, give it an href of chat slash dollar chat.id and make it a class block. So now each chat item is an anchor tag, and once I click on it, it leads me to the chat and the chat ID page, but we do not have that page. So right now it returns a 404. One small addition we want to make is if we do not have any chats, we want to show a message that we do not have any chats, right? So let's do that. If not chats.length, basically if it doesn't exist, we want to render in h1 no chats found. And let's just end this. So right now, if I make chats an empty array, it will just display no chats found to me. So that is it for this video. I think we've made enough progress to commit the code. So let's do that. So in the next video, we're going to be focusing on start a new chat. And that looks something like this. So it's a form which we can upload a PDF file in an initial query. And it's going to be really exciting because we are going to use vector stores to parse out the PDF file and create chunks and store those chunks as vectors, as well as use an LLM to create a title for the chat